Hey, what's up YouTube? This is the Mermail Master coming at you guys from the Team Time Riders YouTube channel with the long-awaited second installment of Learning Mermails. Now today, I am going to showcase to you guys the spells and traps that make the deck run. If the monsters of the deck and the combos they create form the backbone of the Mermail strategy, then it's the spells and traps that really help you to push forward on your plays and to create those opportunities that would otherwise be lacking with the deck. While the monsters are very good, they don't have all of the bases covered, and that's where the spells and traps come in to help you in dealing with some of the threats that the monsters can't take down on their own. If you look at things like Abyss Dweller, you look at things like, Dryden and other things that Mermail monsters might not directly be able to handle in a sufficient enough fashion, the spells and traps can really help to put in a lot of work to help out. So I have a nice selection here of spells and traps that I think really define the Mermail strategy. You may notice the very sufficient lack of instant fusion, and that is with the recent banning of Norden. I'm still doing a little bit of testing to see whether or not, having Thousand Eyes restrict in there, or even putting in a monster such as Sea Monster or Theseus to combine that together to make a Bryanak might be an interesting turn of events for the deck. But getting into some of the sort of basics of how spells and traps work in the Mermail deck and how you should use them for your advantage. So, Mermail decks are kind of interesting because they can be built to go either first or second. If you build a Mermail deck to go first, you're going to want to maximize on specific types of trap cards that can give you advantage. So things like, your eponymous Abyss Sphere, or Solemn Warning and Solemn Strike are fantastic cards to draw first turn. For trap-heavy Mermail builds, Solemn Warning and Strike can put in a serious amount of work, as can these two favorite cards here, Anti-Spell Fragrance and Imperial Order. Both of these cards put in a lot of work against your opponent's spell cards, and with the recent coming of those Pendulum Magicians, these cards are now more capable than ever. Mermail decks need to be very, very adept at creating and breaking boards, but at also bearing down on your opponent and preventing them from making plays. So while the Double Totally Awesome board can be made, as you guys saw in the last combo video, it's not necessarily like the best kind of thing. But in terms of first turn plays and being able to shut down things that your opponent would do, monster summons, monster effects, and then spell cards are pretty much the key thing that you're going to be seeing second turn. We may see a resurgence of things like Royal Decree when Struggling Battle comes out in the next set, Circuit Break. It's a very, very broken card and can easily really mess up an established board. But, right now, having these spells and traps could be a good way for, at least a trap-heavy Mermail deck to make a difference. I'll get into a couple of the Mermail traps and stuff later, such as these, the Abyss Spheres, and things that are related to archetype stuff. So now we're going to move on to some of the trap and spell cards that really, really matter. And in chief among those are these. When you're a Mermail deck and you're going second, you have a lot of different plays that you want to make. Starting chiefly out, this card doesn't really see a lot of play anymore due to, its inability to, transfer some powers of the OTK. It will cut the monster who you protect's attack power down. But Forbidden Lance is a great, great way to prevent your opponent's spells and traps from affecting a Megalo or affecting a Pike, or allowing you to resolve a specific play that you wouldn't have been able to resolve otherwise. Pair that together, of course, with the one, the only Forbidden Chalice. Now, a lot of Mermail players usually run Forbidden Chalice in 2, and this Forbidden Chalice is a great way to shut down things like Dryden, to shut down things like Broad Bull. It's like an effect veiler, but it can happen during either player's turn. And for a while I used to run this card as a way to shut down Dwellers. Your opponent activates Dweller during the standby phase, which means that if you draw into a Dark Hole or a Raigeki or something like that, you won't be able to use that card right away. You have to plan Forbidden Chalice to chain to something that would be effective. Like, let's say an Exciton Knight, for instance. If your opponent activates an Exciton Knight's effect, if you activate Forbidden Chalice to try and negate Exciton without, any sort of response, they can just chain Exciton, pop your entire field. But if you time Forbidden Chalice's negation to negate Exciton or to negate a card monster effect that would, blow out your entire field, it can be very, very effective in a very potent way to shut down your opponent. Monster negation is very key in this time because they're largely taking the place of spell and trap cards in terms of, large-scale removal and disruption. And, you see that in cards like Dryden, of course, which can pop a card during either player's turn and really, really create a lot of problems for players trying to establish boards, especially when, you can get an entire field full of Drydens and other things on the field for free. But, so we've gone over first these. Now, we're going to go over how some other Mermail plays work in terms of destruction. Now, you may be asking why I have 2 Dark Holes and a Raigeki here. And the reason why I have both of these sets of cards is because I've tried to optimize my particular iteration of the deck for going second. Mermails are a very, very strong deck that for a while was very good at board breaking. However, there's not enough power wrapped up in the deck to be able to break boards nowadays. And without, with Dark Hole and with Raigeki, the Zodiac boards that you build are free. Like the Zodiac boards that any player can build are free. However, they will not really be protected. So it's not like building an entire board of synchros with like a Crystal Wing and Sulkin and a lot of things, like 4 or 5 negations like you'd see in a Metal Foes Yang Zing deck. But Dark Hole and Raigeki can easily deal with an established board, and at the very least, if your opponent's rocking like a My Body is a Shield or something like that, you knock them down 1,500 life points, and it makes it a little bit easier to get the OTK in. But having these ability to board break, you'd only run it in, like, if you were going second, and I've seen a lot of players side deck Dark Hole and Raigeki. Because to be honest, when you're going second, Dark Hole pretty much is just like a Raigeki. You have no cards on the field, so you just pop your opponent's stuff. So this is like destroying things that your opponent has. So right now in the deck, we've gone over protection and destruction. Now, we're going to go over filtering. Mermails need card advantage, and combo pieces are the main idea behind the Mermail deck. If you don't have the combo pieces you need, you have a Megalo with only 1 other card in your hand, maybe a Megalo and 1 Atlantean, or you have, multiple Atlanteans in your hand and no way to discard them, that can create a really, really big problem. Now, a lot of you guys who've seen my videos in the past know that I do not like Pot of Desires, and there's a reason behind that. Mermails run a lot of one-of cards and a lot of different combo pieces that they want to see as much as possible. Having Desires is, yes, it can give you 2 draws, but it can also banish a bunch of stuff that you may need. With Moray of Greed, you cycle things in your hand back into the deck for later use, and at the same time you draw into things. So I've opened Moray of Greed several times with 2 Atlanteans or water monsters that I can't use, like a gun and a Mander, which are just completely useless together. Cycle them back in and I'll get a Neptibus and maybe 2 Atlanteans and be able to go off an OTK from there. Simply being able to draw 3 cards, whether or not you've shuffled 2 back into the deck, is a very, very powerful play and should not be underestimated in any means. Moray of Greed can put a lot of, hands fixed, and in a combo deck like this, being able to have a second chance and a second mulligan like that can be way, way more advantageous than one might think. So this is the chief way that you can use to cycle back stuff, especially since you can't use duality or some of the other pot cards are a little bit too slow. But it can be a very good way to cycle stuff. So now that we've gone over destruction and cycle, I want to go over rebirth and recursion, / a little bit of play extension. So depending on how you like to play things, we have Salvage 1-for-1 and Soul Charge here as the 3 main spell cards that you would probably use in a Mermail deck to recur certain things. Soul Charge is fantastic to see first turn, especially if you're milling something from the top of your deck, or you've got a Neptibus in your hand. A Neptibus and Soul Charge on your first turn can lead to incredibly large pluses for you and a lot of pain and damage for your opponent. One of the biggest things about Soul Charge is that you can also time it, on the destruction of like one of your other cards, like to be able to create more issues for your opponent, because Soul Charge itself is maybe at the best like a +4, and reborning a whole bunch of monsters, creating a double Dragoons Dweller, or like putting out a bunch of Dragoons and other cards and making a Bahamut Shark, all of those plays are very, very potent and very easy to do. So having the ability to use them in tandem with Soul Charge is good. The next cards that I have here is Salvage. And Salvage, a lot of people don't really seem to want to run it as much, but you'd be surprised at how good of a card this can be. Fetching back any 2 water monsters with 1500 or less attack includes Neptibus. It includes pretty much every Atlantean but Dragoons. So that's Neptibus, that's Marksman, that's Heavy Infantry. Even if you're running the Atlantean attack squads, you can still search that back as well. Let's see, there's a lot of other things you can search, and the brand new, which we're running, Fishboard Launcher, in order to go into White Aura Whale, is another very, very good card to search with that. And speaking of Fishboard Launcher, having 1-for-1 is another great way to filter not only Neptibuses out of your deck, get things out of your hand that you want in the graveyard, but to also kickstart your plays without using your normal summon. For Mermails, a normal summon is a very, very important thing. So you have to keep an eye out for how that's used. When you have a normal summon, you can put out a Neptibus, but if it gets negated, you're sort of eventually bottlenecked. And 1-for-1 kind of extends your plays a little bit more and allows you more flexibility. So you absolutely have to run 1-for-1, especially because Neptibus is a 3-of. So I would go so far as to call that a staple, even for instance if Salvage and Soul Charge are not. So now we've gone over recycling, recursion, protection, and destruction in the Mermail spell and trap cards. Now, time to move on to the spell and trap cards, archetype specific themselves. So I want to start first out with a personal tech card of mine, Aqua Mirror Cycle. Now you may be thinking, oh, I've never seen this card before, like why is he running this? Well, Aqua Mirror Cycle is a really, really fantastic card if you want to build a Mermail deck that focuses upon, spell and trap cards and pushing for OTKs, kind of like how Mermail decks were built back in 2014 when Gun was at 1 and Dragoons was at 1. Aqua Mirror Cycle basically allows you to target 1 water monster you control at any point, if your opponent mirror forces or bottomlesses or whatever, and 2 water monsters in your graveyard. And this doesn't have the restriction of Salvage. It means any 2 water monsters. Shuffle the first target into the deck, and if you do, add the second targets to your hand. So your opponent activates a card in response to like a water monster. You activate this, target 2 Dragoons in your graveyard and the water monster on your field, shuffle it back into your deck to prevent it from destruction or harm, where it could probably be searched later, and then add those 2 water monsters back into your hand. You may be asking why I'm pointing out Aqua Mirror Cycle when Totally Awesome and other cards are a lot more sufficient at recurring, certain monsters back into your hand. Like Totally Awesome can recur any water monster when it's sent to the graveyard as well. So why ask about this? Well, the reason that I brought Aqua Mirror Cycle back into the foray is precisely because of the dual whammy of Lynx coming in and destroying the Totally Awesome plays that Mermails can make in combination with the banning of Norden. Thanks a lot, Zodiacs, for taking away a lot of the plussing that Mermail decks were able to do in the past. The banning of Norden hurts us more than anything, and Zodiacs may have been able to loop continuously, but Mermail decks lost a key piece of searching and recursion. And by testing out and teching in Aqua Mirror Cycle, I'm hoping that, Mermail players out there might be able to get a little bit more benefit out of everything that they're doing. So, that's Aquamirror Cycle, and I think it could be possibly a decently good card in Mermail decks, depending if they take that path in the future. And so the last cards that I want to talk about today are, of course, the Abyss cards. Now, these Abyss spell and traps have the ability to be searched by Megalo and Lead, and they all serve different functions. My favorite of the spell cards, of course, is Abyss Scale of Mizuchi, followed very, very closely by Abyss Scale of the Cetus. Now, these cards give Mermail monsters 800 attack points per turn, so you bump your Megalo up from a 2400 to a 3200 beater. He attacks twice with that, and then that plus like a Dragoons or something is game. But both it and Cetus give 800 attack, but can also negate the very first spell or trap card activated in the turn. So if you're going for an OTK, for instance, shout outs to Cosmic King for doing that, use Abyss Scale of the Cetus. And if you're going for, a first turn play or even another OTK or whatever, use Abyss Scale of the Mizuchi. Your opponent ends up having to waste a card. If they don't have like a field spell or a continuous spell to activate, they end up wasting a card to get Abyss Scale of the Mizuchi off the field, and their card still ends up getting negated anyway, even if they can use it again next turn. So it's a really, really good way to both act as like a little bit of offense and a little bit of defense. Abyss Sphere, of course, is pretty self-explanatory. And, in exchange for not being able to activate like any spell cards while this card is face up, you'd usually activate this at the end of your opponent's turn, like, in old Mermail decks, special summon a Lyn, and then Lyn would either grab you a Pike or a Megalo, and you discard an Atlantean and basically like get a little bit of extra turn play in on your opponent's turn. But Abyss Sphere is really great on your turn as well, because what you can do with Abyss Sphere is you can activate this to summon the missing piece that you need for an XYZ, of course after you activate all your spell cards, and then this card will stay around and then eventually get destroyed during your opponent's next end phase. But the key thing that it has kind of an offensive capability, but also a defensive capability. And when Mermails became more OTK based, a lot of players found themselves dropping this card. But I still think that it does have a lot of use and can be very, very useful for you. There have been situations like when I was in a regional, I teched in one Abyss Sphere, and it actually came up quite a lot. I was playing against a lot of Cosmo decks, and I'd set this card, summon it like that, and then be able to chunk block a play for the turn. So they'd have OTK on board, but I'd be, left at like 1,200 life points or something like that, right before their farm girl got in for game, just because Abyss Sphere was able to, chump block one of their attacks. That, having something like that that's easy to access and very easy to use can be a pretty important kind of development. So there's that. And then the last card I wanted to point out for the spell and trap cards, of course, is Abyss Squall. Now, this is another card that a lot of people have taken out, but it can be, again, extremely useful if you know exactly what to do. So you can target any 3 Mermail monsters in your graveyard, special summon all of them, their effects are negated, and they are destroyed during the end phase. Great for triggering Lyns and stuff, but even better for like XYZs and chump blocking specific plays. These are also like a pretty interesting kind of scenario. But, it in and of itself is like a fairly good card. So I'd recommend that if you're using Abyss Squall, maybe have a way to get Mermail monsters into your graveyard, or to make it so that they can easily be cycled into your graveyard. So you're not having like an issue of monsters getting caught or monsters getting unable to be used simply because you haven't been able to cycle them through your graveyard. But if you are able to build them, and if you're able to, put Abyss Squall into there, it can be a very beneficial card for you in moving forward. So that is Abyss Squall. And before we end this video, I have one more card that I want to discuss that's kind of like a tech card in a way, but This is something that I've wanted to discuss about for a very, very long time. And that card, you guys have probably never seen this before, but that card is Message in a Bottle. Message in a Bottle is, quite frankly, a very, very interesting card. Kind of like Abyss Squall, it allows you to target 3 monsters with different levels in your graveyard and special summon all 3 of them. Their attacks become 0 and their effects are negated. And the idea is that if you do not XYZ summon this turn after summoning those 3 monsters, you lose 4,000 life. And it happens during the end phase, so right before your opponent's turn. However, you cannot special summon any other monsters except by XYZ summon during the turn that you activate this card. So you may be thinking like, oh, whatever, it's not really that good of a card. But all of the Mermail monsters that you have things in this deck that are level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and level 7. And having Message in a Bottle and being able to XYZ summon or put a certain monster on a board and prevent specific things from happening can be very, very beneficial for you. And I've used Message in a Bottle several times, like on the first or second turn, to put a bunch of cards on the field, summon whatever I had, remaining, like a normal summon or whatever. And, even if you do take that 400 life points, you still got a battle phase, and you still have the ability to special summon something that can be used. So this is another real option to consider, and it's a tech card that I really enjoyed playing in Mermails. A lot of different levels and a lot of different plays you can make with it. But yeah, so this was a overview. This was an extensive overview on the spells and trap cards in the Mermail deck and how best to utilize them for your advantage. I hope you guys enjoyed the second installment of Learning Mermails, and I hope to see you guys back for the third. In the third installment and in the fourth installment and onward, we're going to be getting into the meat of the Mermail deck, discussing how to utilize the monsters in the deck, what different plays you can make, and how best to formulate your strategies. So please make sure to join me for that. And this has been the Mermail Master from the Team Time Riders YouTube channel, and I'm signing out. Catch you guys next time. Peace.